So good morning, everybody. Hi, Susie. Let me share my screen. Okay, hopefully y'all can see my screen now.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about HPMS. We've spoken about this before. In fact, I did this exact same demo last year, but it's probably second with regards to the most requested demo. And it's also something, there's been some changes in the last year that I want to point out, and it makes the HPMS a little bit more interesting, I think. So one of the fundamental challenges with HPMS in Jackalope since forever has been that Jackalope is a point-based system. So you have traffic sites out there that represent points of the roadway, line across the roadway, and that's where you collect data. And that point has an AADT, and it might have a K factor and D factor, another HPMS statistics, but it's a point. HPMS is a section-based requirement, and so in Jackalope, you go through all the trouble to get your traffic data. You go through all the phases of annual, which we're going to talk about this afternoon. And then at the end, you run HPMS and you get K factors and D factors and single unit and combo averages and single unit and combo peaks, but they're at points and not at sections. And that's historically been a problem in a few areas, one of which is Stephen, several years in a row, harped on, okay, your summary statistics have to be weighted by VMT, which is great. And some people ask us for summary statistics, but as a point system, we don't have VMT because VMT is something that requires lines. They require sections. So you have to have a length times the AADT in order to get your VMT. So we've been working, getting some section information. In fact, what I showed last year, I think, was the first time that I showed basically how Jackalope can have section information in it. And basically, it kind of beefs up your HPMS system a little bit. Because all of a sudden, you can look at routes, and you can look up and down a route and see, oh, the K factor is 12 here, and then it jumps to 16 right here, and then it goes back to 12. What's going on? And you can do more sane QC based on actually looking at routes instead of individual points that may or may not have any relation to each other. So that's kind of what I wanted to focus on this demo. HPMS is still a point system, but with the section information, it gives you more flexibility with regards to how you view the data and what you can do with it. So I'll show you that today. Most of our clients are still uncoupled with any sort of section information. Right now, the only client is Wyoming, Chad, shout out. And everybody else is using it as a point-based system, which is fine. And I'll show you how that works too. But let's go ahead and jump on in. So in Jackalope, data operations, annual phase 5 is HPMS. And again, a little preview for this afternoon. We'll be going through the other phases this afternoon, including a few that you don't see here, or a couple that you don't see here. We are in Wyoming right now, so you're going to see the section-based HPMS. So this might look different than what you're used to seeing. All right. And I have to apologize. I decided to mess up my test database this morning. I had it all working nicely last night, but this is a super old Wyoming export. And this morning I decided to upgrade it, and I skipped a step. And I won't go into the details, but you're going to see duplicate sections, and just ignore that. Pretend those don't exist. That's user error. Okay, so when you get into the HPMS system, you'll see a few things. Across the top, of course, you can pick your year of what you're looking at. I'll go into this here, but basically there's a summary view, and then there's drill down views where you can actually look at individual statistics and how they were created and how they were applied to that particular site. Of course, you can run HPMS here for the year. If I press this right now, it would run it for 2017. Oh, here. If I run it right now, it'll say We're going to run it for 2017. Do you want to preserve the statistics that I've plugged? Because we do have the ability to plug statistics where there's missing statistics or where you know something's off. And you can also preserve plug group averages. And then this log just shows you the log of what happened last time you ran HPMS for the year. Kind of more interesting is over here on the right. These are the HPMS QC that occur in the HPMS, the Silverlight application that your HPMS coordinator uses to submit your HPMS data. So the idea, what's changed recently in the last 2 or 3 years, is to give you the ability to really QC your data before throwing it off to the HPMS coordinator to QC. Because what happened 3 or 4 years ago is you would generate your HPMS stats file, and it would be really difficult to know what was right and what was wrong. You'd throw that file at your HPMS coordinator. They would process it into the HPMS software and then come back with a list of 5 jillion things that you've got to take care of. So the idea with this new interface is to be able to short circuit that process and let you look at what the HPMS software is going to yell at your HPMS coordinator about, and you can deal with it before getting the file to them. So here in 2017, we these are the errors that occurred when we ran HPMS. Just seeing a comment here. Oh, thank you. Steven says that's great to allow people to review traffic data early. So just a quick summary of the QC. Missing ADT, that's pretty obvious. HPMS likes ADTs at all the sections. K-factor out of range. The K-factor range, it has to be between 4 and 20. So in this case, there are 34 sites that did not meet that criterion. D-factor out of range, same thing. D-factor has to be 100 for one-ways. D-factor has to be greater than 70 for bidirectional roads. There are 18 that failed that. D-factor has to be less than 70. SU, single average is missing, single is 40%, total ADT, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to go through all these, but these are the HPMS QC that happen in the software itself. So what happens now? Unfortunately, I was trying to find a non-section enabled HPMS locally here that we could play around with, and apparently we don't have a test, a non-sectionalized HPMS. So what you're looking at right now is the section version of the HPMS. And you can turn that on by going into options down here and enabling traffic section functionality. And you could click that button all you want, but unless you actually have traffic sections in Jackalope, it's not going to be very, very fun. So really what has to happen first is we have to get your section information into Jackalope. Then you can enable that, and then you can look at things from a section based. Right now, if I were able to show you a non-section based HPMS, this would not be here. But I think everything else is the same. I think you can still view by site group and you can still do everything else. So for those that don't have section information, just ignore that part right there. So once you've seen this, you might want to actually drill down and look at the data. Down here below is the detail information. So these are, currently I'm looking at this by route because we're in the section information. These are all the routes in Wyoming. And so, I clicked on the RP 496. There's only one, but here are all the sections, all one of the sections with an ADT of 10 on RP 496 there. Let's go to that was a little bit boring, sorry. Let's go over to something more interesting. That's not more interesting. Something with fewer digits has to be better. Yes, that's better. Okay. So we can sit here and we can flip through the routes of the system. And then when you do that, you get a list of all the segments, the traffic sections in that route. And so for here, ML23, we're seeing each section. So here's the beginning mile point of the section, so 235.23, and that goes on down here. Each of the red boxes represents one of these errors up here. Okay, you can hover over the box to see what the problem is. So in this case, single unit average is 0 or null, which is pretty obvious here. But in fact, these are all just 0 or null errors. But here's where you can go and look at that. And an important thing, with the section that you don't see with the site-based HPMS is we are viewing this in order across the route. So, I mean, this is, the single unit average goes from 9.2 to 9.2, and then down to 5.4, etc. Stephen, don't yell at Wyoming for this data. This is way old, way test data. So their data is perfect. This is old test data, so don't get mad. And then combo average, the same thing. Okay, so let me, I guess, are there any questions on the summary view here? This is really important to just allowing you to QC the data. You can also drill down and look, like let's say I want to see something with the K factor out of range. First of all, I'm going to go to all routes here. Because there's only 34, and the chances of me hitting the right route are basically 0. So when I go to all routes, at this point, it looks like the site interface. In fact, this is exactly what non-perfect section enabled people look like. They have site, and then they have all the statistics. When I had a route selected, this first column was beginning mile point. So right now we're looking at the interface as if it were the site. And so you can look at all the K-factor errors by clicking that. And of course, all of the errors are listed here. So if this list is the exact same list as this list over here. So here we can find all the K-factors out of range. What is going on here? I'm not sure. I'm going to drill down to the K-factor. The summary view just gives you kind of a snapshot of everything. When you actually want to evaluate statistics, like I'm going to work on K-factors today, you drill down to the detail view, which gives you a lot more information. So basically, I went down to the K-factor view here, and we can see all the sites that where the K-factors are out of range. Mostly high, it looks like. We don't have any low K-factors. This is not the most interesting data set in the world because this was test data from a long time ago. But you can basically, you can calculate an HPMS statistic any number of ways. And those ways are represented here. You can actually have a count. And if you had a count, that counts K-factor would show up here. You can have a route average, and if we had created route averages, that route average number would show up here. You can create group averages, which maybe by functional class or whatever. This would be for volume statistics like K and D factor. This group I think this group is your seasonal factor group. So this would create a seasonal factor group average. If this were not K factors, but like single unit average, the group would be the axle factor. You could plug values here, in which case it would show up here. For Minnesota, we have a parent-child, and I think there's been interest in other states too, other clients too, for using this, where you have one site that represents the kind of statistics for a bunch of other sites. The one site that is collected would be the parent, and then the children would be all the sites associated with that parent. So if this 00020 were a child of some parent that was counted, you would see the parent statistic here.
Joe, I wanted to point out, Stephen mentioned a new value that's allowed in the range for K factors. So I guess maybe we should take note of that. I don't know if we knew that.
Yeah, and and that represents a challenge for us too, because we're not plugged into the HPMS software, so the HPMS software can change out from underneath us, and so we do need to communicate with Steven and whoever else to make sure that our QC matches HPMS QC. And I think we went through that process maybe a year or something ago, but we probably need to do it again because the HPMS software does change fairly frequently, doesn't it, Steven? Not every day, but it's not surprising to see 1 or 2 changes a year, is my understanding.
Yeah, sometimes it's 5 or 6, and other times it's just a couple. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's on us. We need to make sure.
Okay.
We probably just every year in December call Steven and bug him and say, hey, what's new this year, and incorporate that into Jackalope HPMS. I'm sorry, Steven, you're going to say something? No?
I might have been talking. I said, okay. I made a note, so we'll get that on our to-do list in December.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. What's a good date, Steven? When are you thinking about June's HPMS? Are you thinking about it as early as December, or when would you finalize the HPMS QC?
Yeah, I was trying to type. It's easier just to talk. It varies based upon what HPMS is doing with their software. So lately, they haven't been updating the software to be like a new version where they're trying to do, and roll out things that are time consuming. So, we've had our meetings kind of early. So easily by November, December timeframe, I could easily provide to you and all the, all the vendors what those values are, and so that's not a problem. But sometimes they've been in a crunch, and literally in March or April they don't know what the values are. But we've in the last 3 years we've been able to provide them early.
Okay. So we would just probably we would contact Steven in November, December. We'll pick a date, and then he'll say, oh, this is going to be a crunch here, in which case we'll probably have to follow up again and maybe get people a hot fix in April. But the idea is that we perfectly represent the HPMS software's QC. Okay, so anyway, what you can do in this case, I wish I had more interesting data, because imagine this matrix here is actually filled out with stuff. Like there would be a group average, there would be a route average, there would be a count average, or not a count average, but there would be actual counts. You can come over here and say, well, and which one we use is dependent on these HPMS precedence rules, which I'll talk about in a second, or which I'll show you in a second. But a count might be the one that might be number 1 in priority. And if you don't have a count, then okay, let's use the route average. And if you don't have the route average, then let's use the group average, kind of tiered precedence. And anyway, based on that precedence, we decide on a final statistic. One of the things I didn't mention is last year is another source of data. And so essentially that's all we have. We only have last year because this is a test database and we don't actually have any real data. So it's just propagating forward last year's HPMS statistics. So that's what was used here. But you could go in and double click on any value and say, instead of using last year's value, I want to use the count value, or I want to use one of these other values. And then, or you can just pick another value that, randomly. So, and you can resolve these is one way. If you are a section-based person, you have a little bit more, you have a cool tool available to you. I don't know. I'm not really familiar with all the. Okay, cool.
And I noticed Chad's not in yet today, or not attending, so
all right.
He can't help us.
That's all right. Not that. Sorry, let me just find a route. Where was I? So it's like 25 or something. 26?
No, he is in now. I didn't see him earlier, but I don't know.
Oh, it's because I have this thing clicked. So this is user error. I have the filter clicks, so it's only showing me sections that have the K factor out of range. So we're going to unclick that. Don't do that when you're using this. Don't be like LJ. Okay. So when you have the section functionality enabled, you have a really cool tool available to you that you don't otherwise. And this cool tool is the Fill Statistical Gaps tool. And what this does is it takes a subset of your data. Generally, it's going to be counts. So across a route, maybe you have 3 different sections that were counted across that route. And you can extrapolate the other sections in that route by doing the statistical best fit curve with those 3 points. So here, let's just pretend we have 3 sections with counts, and they would show up here. We actually have, what, 8 total sections here. You can kind of create a curve with those 3 real points and estimate what these other points would be based on their length, where they are on this curve. I don't know if I'm describing this well. Am I being clear? Do you guys understand what I'm saying? So this would allow you to fill in missing statistics and fill in statistics that are just bogus. Because sometimes you have count values and then you have, well, there's no count, so we're going to use the route average or the group average, maybe it's seasonal group average. Well, that's just crazy. That's way out there on some other thing. And you can overwrite that by using this fill statistical gaps. You would say, I want to use all my count data and I want to output that to all non-count data, basically. And then it would go through and just overwrite all those other statistics by a nice, smooth curve. Does that make sense? And that's actually a pretty cool tool for HPMS because that's something I know that Steven does a lot. He goes through, he shows it, he's been showing it the last couple of years. He has his GIS view of your data, and he goes through and he looks at a D factor or a single unit average across a route. And he'll see where, where all of a sudden you go from, okay, here's a 10, 10, 10 single unit average, and it goes to 20. And then it goes back to 10, 10, 10. That's something that jumps out at Steven. And that's what this tool is supposed to take care of. It's a kind of a smoother. It'll go through and take your actual data and kind of smooth that out to the rest of the route. Does that make sense? I hope. Okay. Let's talk about HPMS precedence real quickly.
There's a question in there from Christy.
Okay.
How are sections? Okay, so how are sections added and uploaded, and can they be updated quickly as needed?
Okay, I will show you that in 1 second, Christy. Probably the real answer to that is we would, if it's why we are the gospel. We actually create and manage traffic sections in Jackalope for Wyoming. They have a separate traffic segment LRS system that we integrate with. It's an ESRI system. It's not, I don't think it's roads and highways, but it's a different. So we would have to kind of evaluate that. I mean, ideally, you're not managing the sections in Jackalope. Like for all the roads and highways people that are in our roads and highways meetings, that's information that we can just pull over from roads and highways, probably, if it exists. And so for them, it's not even something they manage. They would be able to see it here, but they wouldn't manage it here. They would manage it in roads and highways. But let me get to that in a second, Christy. I'll make sure we have time to look at that. Yes, so Stephen, you proof all the data. Absolutely. Don't you? I thought you did do that, or no? Don't you sit there and proof all the data? I thought that was your job, or maybe
No,
you
I'm saying you Steven proof it. It's like you put a
Oh.
smoothing on it.
Steven proof
So,
it. Not that you proof. Yeah. Okay. You got to Steven proof it.
But
Absolutely.
I do check all the data, yes.
Yes. You definitely want to Steven proof your data. Okay. So let's talk about HPMS precedents. Like I said, there are multiple ways, or we will create every kind of statistic that we can at a given section, and every kind of statistic is one of these. If there's a count, we'll create a count statistic. If there's something from last year, we'll use that. If there's a group average, we'll use that. If there's a parent statistic, and again, parent is the ability to set up a relationship where we count this one site, and that's the parent site, and then we spread that statistic to all the children's sites. That's a Minnesota thing, but there have been other people interested in that. So anyway, if you're a child of a parent, you could have a parent statistic. Or you can have a route average, which, every route average is, I believe, only available to section people, but I might be wrong about that. I'm not, I'll have to look at that, or there could be no statistics. So in this case, and I probably just put these in here, these are probably not actually what Wyoming uses, but they're going to say, I'm going to use a count statistic if it exists. Otherwise, we're going to use last year's statistic. Otherwise, we're going to use a route average. Otherwise, we're going to use a group average. And maybe that's a perfectly reasonable way to do it. Route averages are usually probably better than group averages always. But it also, we also see this basically. Use a count if you got it. Use last year's or use like a route average if you got it. Otherwise, nulls. And then it's up to you to figure out what those nulls are, either by using that best curve fitting algorithm or something else. And you can do this system-wide, these precedent options. So right now, these are the system-wide precedent options. But if you have site groups, like here's a route that we've defined as a site group, you could have different precedence options for that. There are a bunch of options that are available here. In general, this is something you set once and then never look at again. And as we implement more people, HPMS is one of those processes has traditionally been different for every client. So we have a different HPMS SQL for each one, and each of those permutations is represented here. Let's see. And you can get a snapshot of the statistical methods used for each of your sites. So there's 7,600, but basically they're all from last year. So if we had real data in here, you would actually see some that were counted, some that used factor group average, route average, etc. The generate export button allows you to get your HPMS stats.csv, which is something that people get now or people have gotten historically with the normal SQL, not normal, but the old Tratus SQL that got updated to Jackalope. So it has some metadata stuff, it has the averages, the group averages, and then it has this table of all of your HPMS statistics. And this is what you have historically been giving to your HPMS coordinator. So you can give them this exact same thing. They're not going to have to change their side of stuff when you use this interface. You can create notes here too. I don't think we've talked about notes this users group. We usually have some section where we at least mention it, but just to give you guys a refresher on notes. Looks like something there. Notes give you the ability to determine how data is used in Jackalope. So Jackalope subscribes to the idea that data can be good if it comes in from the field, and good means the data was collected correctly, the counter didn't malfunction, and it's representative of that site. Or it could be bad, which means the counter malfunctioned, or for whatever reason the data came in and it wasn't good. or it can just be weird. And that's where notes come in. So if you have a special count outside of a stadium and you're going to get some crazy volume during the big football game, that's good data, but it's weird data, and it's not data that you necessarily want to use for your HPMS submittal. Or, you know, if you have an ATR and there's construction around it, you know, again, you're getting good data from that ATR probably, but it's just not representative of your, you know, normal daily traffic. And maybe while the construction's going on for those 2 months, you want to create a note that says, this data is good, but it's weird, it's construction, and we don't want to use this data for the calculation of the ADTs. We don't want to use it for calculation of factors or anything like that. So just a quick refresher on what notes are in Jackalope. And another thing you can do, this note type right here, is you can have data in the system which is good for all these other purposes. You know, I want it for the ADT, I want it for, if it's continuous, you could say I want it for factoring, for creating factors. You know, but if it's short term, it might, you know, you may want to use it for ADTs, but you might not actually want to use it for HPMS. And this is pretty common when we see people using short-term counts to create, like, for example, K-factors. You know, when you use a short-term count to create a K-factor, you may not get a K-factor that really represents what a K-factor ought to at that section. So you may have real counts around it that have more representative like K-factors, but this one, for whatever reason, was weird. And so you may mark that particular count as saying, I want to keep it, I want it to be reported, I still want an ADT for that, but you know what, I don't want to use it for HPMS, it's too weird. And you could create a note here and exclude it from consideration in HPMS. Likewise, you could say, I also don't want to use this when creating average statistics. So when we were looking at precedents, we saw we were going to create group averages, we were going to create crowd averages. Again, a statistic might be good enough to use in submittal here, but it doesn't represent, you know, whatever average we're trying to use. So you might want to exclude it from the group average. So there's a quick way to create notes here as you're just sitting here looking down your corridor and saying, oh, you know, the K factors are 14, 14. Oh, wow, it went to 17. That's weird. I want to exclude that. You could do that here. There's something that we use at the beginning called evaluate bin schemes. For your class statistics, it's important that we understand what bins in your class, when you're collecting class, go to which of the HPMS bins, you know, single unit and combo. And so this evaluate bin schemes allows us to do that. And this unfortunately is test data, so we don't have anything interesting, but here's where we could go and say, well, you have a binning scheme that you use this year, a length binning scheme is usually the culprit, which is a new length binning scheme. How do we map those 5 binning schemes to the single unit and combo stuff that we have to use for HPMS? So that's what that does. And that's pretty important to figure out in the beginning. Okay, we only have 2 minutes left, so I'm gonna move on so I can answer Christy's questions. Any question on this so far? Okay.
There's one question Susie posed.
What consideration can HDT think of why a transportation agency would not use this HPMS tool, i.e. resources, etc.? Well, I know we have some people, and this might be a better question for Catherine or for our group. You know, they press the HPMS button, they get the HPMS stats, they hand that to the HPMS coordinator, and that appears to be the end. And I don't know what magic happens between the scenes to make that happen, but we may just not fit in their pipeline. I don't know. How many people do we run HPMS for, Catherine, like percentage-wise? Is it half?
I don't know what you mean. The only state I think we don't provide HPMS output to is Idaho.
Okay. So
everyone else, we give some form of the HPMS some the full gamut of statistics and some fewer, like Utah uses fewer because they do a lot of their class probably through Todd.
Right.
And Margaret says they may be changing that, so.
Yeah, and I know Minnesota does the opposite. They do other class here, but not the volume. At least I think it used to be the case. So I think most people probably will be using this eventually, Susie. I hope so. And I didn't mention it this time, but that, you know, we didn't pay much attention to HPMS at the beginning. In fact, we didn't have HPMS code at all at the beginning because we were thinking, well, that's a section thing. We're not a section database. So why are we even thinking about this? We'll provide traffic statistics to the LRS. They can deal with the section stuff. That's not our job. And then we started kind of creeping into it because people will ask us, well, we still don't know what the K factor is or whatever. I mean, now it's at the point where I think there is no more visible output to this entire world than the HPMS statistics that we generate. So, I mean, we spend a huge amount of resources, and when I'm saying we, I mean you guys, you know, with, you know, maintaining your counters, you know, having all you guys throughout the years, you know, QC your data, getting into the system, running monthly, creating your factors, the whole, you know, the TMG, all the TMG right there that you've got to deal with and do your job. This right here is what a huge amount of people, a huge percentage of people care about. You know, they don't care about all that other stuff. And so if there is one interface that I'd like to nail in Jackalope, it's this one. You know, getting the statistics out there in a timely manner. The statistics look good. You're not getting a bunch of rejects from the HPMS people. This is what I want to nail more than any other interface in there. So we've kind of gone full circle from not caring about it at all to now it being basically the most important thing that we do. So I hope.
So I was going to comment. So up until this year, mostly I would run this same code, but in you know, through SQL in the background. And so I anticipate as of this coming 2020 submittal, everyone will be needing to run this themselves. They will get in and run this other than Wisconsin. Their rules are too complicated to have been written into this interface, at least up until now.
Advanced.
Huh?
Rules are too advanced.
Yeah, a lot of fallback rules that aren't written in. Anyway, so everyone that's in this and watching, just beware when you say, hey, I'm ready to run HPMS this year. I'm going to say, okay, go ahead. It's not us now running it behind the scenes through SQLs. It's going to be each state using this interface themselves.
Yeah, and we really want your feedback. I mean, if there's things that, you know, just are really annoying about this interface, and if you have an idea of.
So one thing from Minnesota is that when we do, like when we get the outputs, we need to import them into another system. So like the big HPMS output at the end is not in a format that we can easily break out just a certain part of it to hand over to another system. So from that perspective, it would be nice to be able to get that in its individual parts.
And we can do that. So basically, each of these things that you're seeing right here, so this table right here is actually a view in Oracle. And you know, we could give you the view name that would give you exactly this information, you know, or exactly this summary information. You know, if that's easier. If you were to say, here's this view called whatever, I can't remember what it's called. Is that what you're looking for? Or you can just in Oracle say, here's what you can do.
Well, we're really trying to make it so that our general staff don't have to have like SQL developer or database tools necessarily. I know that when we get the output, like the big HPMS statistic output, the format is sort of like you can't just sort of take a certain number of columns and use it. You would have to find that section, pull that out, and then you can work with the individual columns.
So when you say individual columns, you would like to be an output that, so here's the K factors by site, or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Just because we're putting it into another system. If you can show the HPMS output the way that it looks, and if you look at where one statistic section breaks into another, you can kind of see how.
We also have a question from Melissa.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can, so you're actually wanting like another way to export the data, basically.
Yeah, that wouldn't involve someone going into the database, because besides me, we really don't have people going in the database.
Yeah. No, that's exactly the kind of stuff we want to hear. Just to make it more usable, we want this to be kind of the finish line of, yes, we finished the year, and this is where things just kind of become golden. So okay, yeah, we'll probably have to discuss more details, but I'd be happy to do more export options there. by statistic type, so K factor, B factor, whatever. That's a good idea.
Joe, does the bottom create a CSV like now? You know how you can use our export tools, not using the buttons, but those the other types of ways where we can export. It exports what you have on the screen.
You're talking about these buttons here.
Yeah. Would that do what she's asking?
Well, you'd have to view everything. Maybe, I don't know.
I think it would. I can test that, and I'm going to write that down. But then I also wanted to call out that Melissa had a question in the screen also.
Okay. All right. So Melissa said, well, we receive a file that QC through XOR. I think that was back when we were talking about who uses it. Susie says, agreed. Having the preliminary traffic data HPMS QC would seem to save time, resources during the annual process workflow. Yes. To reinforce what Stephen said earlier, the better. Yeah, and it's also an appearance thing too. I mean, if you're sitting there giving your HPMS coordinator a pile of garbage that 50% of it gets kicked back, I mean, you kind of look like things aren't going so well in your department. So yeah, it's both a time thing and an appearance thing. Melissa says, but I do like pieces of this. Does it know where samples are, or can you tell it? Yes, that's what, so where the sample sections are, that's where we have to talk about getting your section information from XOR, Melissa. That's kind of what I was talking a little bit about at the beginning, which right now Kentucky is in this paradigm where you're looking at a list of sites. You have no idea if site 003 and 004 are next to each other. They may not be on the same route. Who knows? These are two sites, who knows where they are. In order to get the kind of stuff where you're talking about, where you know where the sample sections are, or anything to do with section information, we have to go to the next step and get your XOR sections into Jackalope. We actually have a table out there that will store it. We have an interface, which I'm not going to have time to show. Oh no, where is it? Here it is. An interface down here that allows you to manage sections. Here are all the sections in the database. You can load. This is what Christy was talking about earlier. You can load your traffic sections if you have a CSV file. You can do that here. Yeah, we need to get the link between site and sections in Jackalope.
Okay, you actually already have them, so we can work on getting them.
Okay.
We push that to you. It's just gibberish, and you don't do anything with it.
All right. Well, if it's, we'll have to, because Jeff's the master of all things Kentucky XOR. We'll have to get with Jeff and see how to turn gibberish into something that we can use.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we're a little over time, 1 minute. Any other questions, or if you guys want another demo where I have a good database, I'm gonna bug Chad after this and ask him to give me a new export, because Wyoming has the best database for this sort of stuff. Let me know, and we can schedule a demo with your HPMS crew, or whoever, and I'd be happy to do that.
Joe, this is Laura. I would mention that you did a really comprehensive and I think fairly complete HPMS training that is on the YouTube channel, although there certainly would be a few additional things now that weren't in that one. So in the meantime, people could refer back to the YouTube channel and see a pretty comprehensive demo, and then we could certainly record another one if it seems like that becomes a need soon.
Okay. Yeah, we might need one for section-based HPMS usage and non-section-based, because it really is a different workflow, for sure.
I was going to mention the same thing to everyone listening, since I had given the probably scary news that they were going to all be running this themselves, and also that demo, well, it's training, that training video is long. So when someone plans to go and watch it, set aside, I think, what, Laura, maybe it's an hour?
Yes.
Yeah, so have time to set aside and expect it to take a bit to get that training done.
Okay, well, we'll break for 10 minutes.